Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a Panzer C game, courtesy of a politically correct name. I think I'm just going to call him PC, because it's very slightly faster to say. Now looking at the matchmaking, well, this is going to be an interesting match. There is one tier 5 on each side. PC's team has a Type T-34, the enemy team has a KV-1. This is absolute god tier matchmaking for really any tier 5 heavy, but the KV-1 in particular with its ridiculous armour. I mean, maybe the KV-220 would be even more ridiculous, but still, the KV-1 is not an opponent you want to see when you're in your Panzer C. Even just some of the tier 4s would be quite tough targets for this gun. The enemy team has 2 Hetzers and a Matilda, for example. But that KV-1 is just utterly impenetrable as far as PC is concerned. So he really has to hope that his teammates are able to take it down. Because if it comes to a situation where he's facing this KV-1 directly, he's probably a bit boned. So he's trying to maybe get up to a spot here where he can shoot over at that Type 91, but he doesn't quite have the traction to do it. I don't know if it's actually even possible to get all the way up there in a light tank. Maybe it is with something that has a bit more oomph to it. I mean, the Panzer C is really very fast, but you'll only really truly hit the top speeds when you're going downhill. Anyway, he's given up on that. He's going to actually try and do some damage on the other side now, pick on some targets that he can go for. You'll notice, I mean, we're not even 2 minutes in, half of his team's dead, nearly half the enemy team is dead. Quite apart from the random matchmaking derp of putting in a pair of tier 5s, this is in all other regards just so far a low tier game, a fairly typical low tier game with lots of people dying very quickly. So, although the KV-1 has 1 kill, he's yet to make his presence truly known. So that Cruiser 4 peeks out a little bit, and it's just angled enough that a lot of his shots bounce there. He's also now on his own. He's lost his second platoon mate. They were platooned up with a T-45. I'm not entirely sure why. It might just have been helping a friend grind something out. So the fact that they had a tier 2 that got dragged into what is technically a tier 5 game is not super great, but even in a tier 4 game that T-45 might have struggled just a bit. But yeah, matchmaking then deciding, let's give one team a tier 5 each. Yeah, a little bit wacky. Not the wackiest matchmaking I've ever seen though. I personally have been the only Su-122-44 in a otherwise exclusively tier 5 match, and you can kind of guess how that went. I got accused of hacking, unsurprisingly. And it was glorious, but it was also utterly unjust and unfair. Sadly, I don't have that replay. I don't know why I never kept that one. It would have been a really good game to show on the channel, but yes, that one does stick in the mind. So he's going to use his speed to get round to the flank where he knows that Type 91 was last spotted. If he runs into the Matilda, at least he can then just run away very quickly. He can outpace that Matilda quite easily. But if it's just the Type 91, it's quite a juicy target. It's something he can at least do damage to. And lo and behold, yes, there is the Type 91. And he blows his head off. Well, okay, there we go then. The Matilda, meanwhile, has been spotted much further down the 3 lines, so he's just been advancing towards the cap. Or, well, that area of the base, anyway. But he's also now run into the Marder 38T, who has a very nasty gun. So, although that's rear armour, yeah, at this range, with this gun, there is pretty much a 0% chance that any of those would ever pen. KV-1, meanwhile, has picked up his 4th kill. And, oh, hello, well that was a shell landing reasonably close by. And if you would guess that the so far unspotted other remaining enemy tank, the Cruiser 2, because this has now been, you know, it's come down to being super close. Yes, if you guessed the Cruiser 2 was in the usual tank destroyer camping spot, you would have guessed correctly. the KV-1 has, unfortunately, very unfortunately for PC, killed that Marder 38T, and that was the tank that had the best chance of tackling him. So, yeah, you know how I earlier mentioned that it would be pretty bad for PC if it came down to a 1v1 with that KV-1? Well, guess what? If you heard me saying that statement earlier and thought maybe it was a bit of foreshadowing, then you definitely guessed correctly. So, his only chance is to cap this out. He cannot hurt this tank. I think the KV-1 would literally have to be flipped on his side, and maybe a Panzer 1C could then penetrate the belly armour. But in all other regards, this is not a fight he can win. There's no way he can hurt this guy. Even ramming into the KV-1, I mean, it would be a suicide run, and there's just no way he could do enough damage. In fact, there's a possibility he wouldn't do any damage at all, just given the disparity in weight between these two machines. Now, we do have one bit of information. The KV-1 is not a derp KV-1. It's got the 85mm, so PC can take one hit. The derp gun, of course, would just kill him outright, although it might be easier to dodge the shells. The 57mm, on the other hand, he could take a couple more hits, but it's a very accurate, rapid-firing gun, so that would be very dangerous in its own way. I think PC at this point is just considering his options. He's not... I mean, he knows he can't hurt this guy. And he knows that in order to cap, he has to get this KV-1 basically on the other side of the map. And maybe with that in mind, he decides, okay, I'm going to make a run for it and see if the KV-1 will take the bait. And this is pretty much his only option. He has to lure the KV-1 away while there's still time, and hope that the KV-1 follows, and then use his only asset, which is his vastly superior mobility, to then get back to the cap and hope that he can get there ahead of the KV-1, either coming back or going to their own cap. That was an incredibly lucky hit into the tracks there, by the way. I mean, this is not a particularly big machine, and so, I mean, he could have taken the hit, but it's much nicer that he didn't have to. Anyway, so he does a little loop around on the eastern flank of the map, climbs the hill in order to try and spot, and of course, in order for this to work, he has to not get spotted himself. He does have that light tank camo advantage, of course, but he doesn't have painted camo on his tank. Oh, there he is. And he doesn't have, well, he does have the camo net, but of course he has to be stationary for that to be active. Anyway, so he spots the KV-1, and this is it. It all comes down to speed. The KV-1 has to climb uphill to get to their cap, whereas for PC, this is a downhill race, so he's actually going to hit 80 kilometers, just over 80 kilometers an hour at one point. And it really comes down to, can he get there ahead of this KV-1? So this is nail-biting. There needs to be at least a 5-second difference between the two. If it's less than 5 seconds, it's a draw. So this is a bit tense. And there we go. So he's got about a 9-second lead. The KV-1 now cannot get back in time. This was basically his only hope of doing this, and the KV-1 fell for it perfectly. So this is one of those times where, despite the shockingly bad matchmaking in terms of just the KV-1 being dumped into what was otherwise a low-tier battle, he was able to outthink his opponent, and it worked perfectly. So there we are. It was only a second-class mastery because he didn't do that much damage, but he did get an Invader Medal, and he is going to be top of the team. That was fairly silly, I thought, and it was more silly because of the matchmaking derping and doing what it did. And it does very occasionally do that. I mean, the matchmaker in World of Tanks will always favour speed over everything else. It tries to balance stuff as much as possible, but it will sometimes throw up results like this. And it was a very silly game overall. So there you go, a Panzer 1C game, and it wasn't the usual. I mean, you hear Panzer 1C replay and you assume it's going to be a tier 3 match and somebody running around and racking up, 10 kills, 12 kills, just murdering literally everything. But that was not the case at all. This was a game where the speed of the Panzer 1C was absolutely crucial. Most of the tier 3s would have not been able to do that. There are very few low-tier tanks that can even begin to match the speed of the Panzer 1C. There are a couple that might have been able to pull it off as well, but there are loads that wouldn't have been able to. So it was, in one way, a nightmare scenario for Panzer 1C, but in another way, with a bit of brain power, he was able to use his one true advantage and actually turn that into a victory. So that was quite a good game, I thought. So hopefully you've enjoyed this replay, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.